And with those words, we conclude the opening session. Thank you, Mr. Kiradbassa. And again, welcome everyone who is either here in this room or watching us online. The program will now continue here in this room straight away with our first keynote sessions. And would our panelists please join me on stage? So, joining forces for global sustainability transformations, that is becoming even more critical. And we know that the next 10 years will both include probably lots of surprises and crises, and it will also set the path for many decades to come. So it's time, we know it's time for effective collective action, and we also know that it's not always simple. There are many unanswered questions about how to take those steps, how do we foster urgent collaborative processes in a way that amplifies democracy and peace and justice and inclusion, and who should take the lead. So in this session that is organized by the Finnish Expert Panel for Sustainable Development, which is an independent body consisting of 10 expert members from a broad range of scientific backgrounds and different universities and research institutions, we will be talking about these questions. How do we join forces? And again, hashtags are the same as I mentioned earlier, EEAC 30, critical decade, and if you want to tag the handle of the Finnish Sustainable Development Expert Panel, that's kestävyyspanel. It's kind of half Finnish, half English, just so you know. But before starting the actual panel, I thought we could let our panelists introduce themselves and say a few words about their relationship to the topic. What are you doing? What is your engagement with this topic? And maybe we can start right here at my left with Ms. Johanna Kentala-Lehtonen.
Okay, good morning everyone, and nice to be here. I'm working at the Prime Minister's office in the EU department. My job is to coordinate the Finnish EU positions for the European Green Deal, and mostly the climate and biodiversity issues, and also forest and agriculture are my responsibilities. So that's the coming from for me. But I also have a doctorate degree in international relations, which was dealing the business actors' influence on climate politics. And so I have been looking at from the point of view of various actors of this problem, and I can see that there is already a lot happening. So while we speak that a lot must to come through, we are already doing a lot, and I would start with the European Green Deal, which I think is a great example of systemic change that we are trying to do in our society at the moment, and that the European Commission has really tried to bring all the sectors, all the economic sectors into these issues of climate and environmental problems, and I believe that a lot is happening, but of course at the moment we also need a lot more. And one thing that I can see influences this development is that the politicians are mostly living in the moment. They are living today's world and today's crisis, and it's difficult for them because it's very hectic for the ministers, and in the situations like we're living at the moment, where there's crisis after crisis after crisis, so it's difficult to look beyond this moment here, and I think it's crucial that we have scientists and other actors who remind and bring it out through the media, for example, for the politicians that the solutions we find to the crisis of today must also deal with the crisis of tomorrow that are coming next if we're not paying attention. But maybe this for the beginning.
Thank you. And next up we have Dr. Åsa Persson. Welcome, and please go ahead.
Thank you so much, and good morning everyone. It's really great to be here, and let me first also say, I think Finland is a real example to the world in terms of sustainable development governance, how you work with the SDGs, and having these 3 panels really set the example. So my name is Åsa Persson. I'm, like I think many of you here, have a research background, still an active researcher. I'm a research director and deputy director of the Stockholm Environment Institute, where we do applied research on sustainable development issues, really try to be useful to policymakers and increasingly also other actors. Business is definitely on the train since a few years, and also civil society. But I am also here as a member of the independent group of scientists to draft the next Global Sustainable Development Report, which is due next year. As you know, it's an SDG summit coming up in a year's time in the UN to take stock of Agenda 2030 and the 17 SDGs. So this group, we are building on the previous report, which actually we had Professor Eva Furman, who's maybe here or not, contributed to, so I wanted to share a bit what we are kind of seeing and learning from that report work.
And then, thank you. And then we have Mr. Olli Karkkainen, please go ahead.
Thanks, and good morning from the Ministry of Finance. So I work in the Ministry of Finance with supporting evidence-informed and data-driven policymaking. So a lot of my job is to estimate the effects of different policy options, for example, on employment and inequality. My background is in economics, and I work as a researcher in the university and both in the public and private sector. So I've been kind of jumping between research and economic policy in my jobs. Coming from the view of the Ministry of Finance and our view of kind of estimating the effects of different policy options, I can see that the view of the Ministry of Finance is broadening as well. So we are not just thinking about employment or economic growth, but also the nature and climate change as a whole. So I think, in my view, we can see the broadening of the point of view also, and I think it's important to have the kind of the whole government looking in the same direction. Thanks.
Thank you. And then next up we have Ms. Miriam Boveda. Welcome and tell us about yourself.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here in Helsinki today. I'm working in the European Commission Directorate General in charge of regional and urban policy. So we are a small group, a team of 7 colleagues working on different issues related to sustainable growth, energy, environment, climate change adaptation and mitigation, and disaster risk management. And we also work on the newly created Just Transition Fund. We are working with the other directorate generals from the Commission, so environment, energy, climate, and other directorate generals to make our investment really transformational at European level. You know that we are the first investment in these areas at TO level, and we are now preparing for the next programming period, 2021-2027. So we are establishing policy lines for our investment. So what do we have to invest as a priority? And of course, we are a key element of the European Green Deal because we make our investment suitable for each region, because we work in partnership with the regions and with the member states. So this is how cohesion policy is implemented. In terms of projects that we want to launch, because we see that some stakeholders want to go further in sustainability transitions, but they need support. So we want to mobilize support in terms of technical assistance to help them in their goals of going beyond in certain projects or program in sustainability transitions. We have published a toolkit for supporting them in their programs, in their investments. So this is what we are aiming at in our team. In terms of background, I have worked also for a city council, so I saw in my daily work what are the key issues that you are facing to implement sustainability in a specific city council. And namely, I worked for the city of Toulouse in southern France. And I have worked in my PhD thesis on solidarity. So also what are the different tensions that you have in the society to achieve solidarity in legal terms, because I'm a lawyer in European law. Thank you.
Thank you. And then finally we have Professor Lassi Linnanen, please.
Hello everybody. I'm representing here a Finnish expert panel for sustainable development, and I'm professor of environmental economics and management at Lappeenranta Lahti University of Technology. My background is in management sciences. Currently our research is linking systems perspective on the sustainability transformation. And when taking this systems perspective, it's pretty obvious that all these, how we call them, crises, like pandemics and war and ecosystem collapse, actually they are all interconnected. So there is actually not crisis after crisis, and we are waiting for the next crisis to come. We have a crisis or a system which is inducing this type of shocks, and then how to deal with this kind of situation. Typically, when taking the systems perspective, you have to look for root causes and try to understand why actually this kind of process goes on. And we will see whether we will able to recognize the root causes here.
Okay, lovely, thank you. Thank you for the introductions. And now we'll start with a very, very broad question. Sustainability transformation clearly requires a systems level approach, and all societal actors should work together in an integrated manner towards a common goal. And kind of starting from the governance point of view, Ms. Kentala-Lehtonen, what do you see as the most important mechanisms or measures for reaching this goal of like integrated collaboration across different sectors in society?
Like you said, it's a very broad question, very, very hard. I would start from the definition, like, and from our value base. Like, I think we should start from defining a good life again. Like, what is good life? And I think this is something that has been changing. Like the understanding in society of the climate crisis has really grown during the last 20 years, maybe. And at the moment, I think that the understanding of the biodiversity crisis is also growing very fast. So I think that these will be seen in the coming elections and in the coming years. And what I think, and saying that we need to define a good life, I mean, of course, that we have to have measurements for right issues, like a GDP may not be the best measure we should use for our economic. And I would take a few examples. What has happened during the COVID pandemic is the change of routines that we have been able to do when we have to. And I think that this is something we should be able to learn from also regarding the crises of the environment. Like once we had to go remote work, we were able to do that. And maybe this is something we can learn from. It was a good thing for the environment. The CO2 emissions went down because the traffic went down. And I think that this coming winter, we will need to learn a lot of new routines with the energy use all over Europe. So I think that we should use these experiences to also better adapt to the new situations of the environmental thing. But then what the government can do and is doing is of course it can soften the change, but it's not only through the financial support, but very much through the structural changes, the new standards, the new legislation is of course needed. But like I said already earlier, I think other actors are really much needed for the support of the politicians to go to the right direction and to have the right information. And at the same time, I think it's crucial that we remember the social aspect of the change, that we cannot come on only from the environmental side, because if we don't keep the people on board, and if we don't have the acceptability for the political decisions, it's impossible to make the change. So this is very, very important aspect to remember.
But to follow up, kind of when you mentioned, for example, the impact of the lockdowns, the CO2 emissions going down, that was a very short-term change that happened, and it's kind of clear that a sort of a forced situation where people have to, in face of a crisis, change their day-to-day lives, is that they're like, in order to make that kind of a change last longer, become a permanent part of people's lives, this will can be. There will, as you said, it will need to be softened. Sort of that process will need to be somehow gentler than what we experienced, for example, with the lockdowns. Do you have any practical tools for how to do that when it comes to transportation or energy use?
Yeah, I think that, well, about the remote work, I would say that we are not going back to the 2019, that it has come to say that part of the week the people will stay at home and work remotely. I think that is lasting from the COVID. Of course, we're not going to stay home forever, but stay more. And also with the energy use, I hope that as we learn the new routines, they will stick with us, because we will also save money. But with the concrete measures, I think the legislation, coming legislation and standards will force us towards this situation. I think in a way the current energy crisis is a kind of a human test for the prediction that when you rise the prices, the consumption goes lower. That is the prediction of the emission trading system and all the climate legislation. So now we'll see if it really happens.
Now I wanted to ask you, Ms. Boveda, for how does the EU's just transition mechanism address these questions of bringing everyone on board, negotiating changes that do come very close to people's everyday lives?
First, let me maybe set the scene. So the Just Transition mechanism is embedded in the cohesion policy, the Just Transition Fund. And we have accompanied structural change for several decades so far. So either by protecting the environment, investing in renewables, energy efficiency. And this is channeled through programming, and we are assessing investment needs, and with our funds, namely Cohesion Fund and ERDF, we are supporting these different areas of investment. So the Just Transition mechanism comes in the framework of the European Green Deal Investment Plan. The objective is to mobilize investment to achieve the European Green Deal objectives. So we have created a mechanism which is new in our policy, which is that on top of the existing support, we give extra support to those who are mostly hit by the transition. And the cornerstone of the implementation of this Just Transition Fund, which is part of the Just Transition mechanism, and the cornerstone of this mechanism is our territorial Just Transition plans. So this is a new approach that we are having in our policy. I would like to underline 3 aspects which I think are key for the transformation. The first aspect is to establish a vision, so a common vision for the territory. And a vision with transition pathways, so with the clear milestones, 2030 and 2050, how do we get there? The second aspect is a clear assessment of the negative impacts of the transition, negative socio-economic impacts, and how will this territory tackle these impacts. And the third very important element, and we are insisting on it, is a strong partnership. Because if all the stakeholders are not pulling in the same direction, the transition and the transformation doesn't happen. We are requesting a broad stakeholder engagement. So if you have a mining region, depending on the problems they are undergoing, we will need to have trade unions on board, we will need to have NGOs, we will need to have coal miners, but also the employers in these sectors. And what is key also for us in the transformation is the involvement of the youth. We see that the youth in certain regions have had a very important role, have played an important role. We have published also a study on the role of youth in Just Transition. So these are the 3 key elements which I would outline. Of course, there are additional ones. We want to support, as I said before, this transformation further. This is why we published a toolkit which recommends also certain forms of governance for this transformation. And we hope to launch, and we plan to launch in 2023, a specific platform to support cohesion policy in this transformation, and which will be called a Cohesion for Transition platform. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Dr. Persson, what implications do these reflections and these issues have for justice and inclusion? Do you believe it is possible, or how do you believe it is possible to achieve a sustainability transformation that is both urgent and fast and effective, but also just and democratic and inclusive, and also, as Ms. Boveda pointed out, also taking into account the future generations' rights and their participation?
Also a very big question, a lot of adjectives, just, inclusive, etc. But of course, this is what we are striving for, and what we have. Countries have expressed they want through Agenda 2030, a commitment to these principles. So I'll share a few thoughts, but also first, when for this global sustainable development report, when we do take stock, we of course see that the 17 goals have stagnated. Basically, this is quite a negative picture, that no progress has really happened since 2019, of course, much due to the pandemic and now the conflict in Ukraine and all the cascading impacts. But what we want to try and do with this report, because I think the previous one really did a good job in terms of specifying what needs to be done we had 6 big transformations were identified, decarbonization, for example, or food system transformation. We want to drill into a bit more the how, and I think what we are currently looking at is 2 sort of key messages we want to really make clearly. One is transformation is possible. There are historical examples of major societal change that we can really learn from. And also transformation is inevitable. So we see that these changes, shocks, crises are sort of happening, and investing in sustainable development is really the best insurance policy. So these are a little bit conflicting key messages. Is it, you know, it's the first transformation is possible, sort of suggests we do have a lot of agency, we can shape these transformations, we can plan them, but transformation is also inevitable. It's, you know, we are kind of, we need to build our resilience, but I think this really reflects the reality of change, that you can both plan it, but you also need to kind of respond to things outside of your control. So we try to look at all these examples and evidence, really provide those inspiring examples, learning. We have had these really big, pretty fast missions historically. The way that social housing was expanded in the post-war period in many countries in the world. Sweden built 1 million homes during a relatively short period. Of course, the US New Deal, which was a massive program, but yeah, of course, the EU Green Deal is partly inspired from that. The Green Revolution, it was transformative, also with a lot of negative impacts, but we can still learn from it. And of course, we have ample examples also when change happens to us, not least the pandemic, as was mentioned. But what we also find, of course, is that fairness is key for the planned transformations, and in the scientific literature on this, we distinguish between fairness in the sense of distributive justice, compensating those who lose, procedural justice, you know, by which decision-making process do you come to these plans, and recognition justice, who are invited to the table. And all these 3 elements are quite important. Maybe we tend to focus more on the distributive aspects first, you know, who is going to lose and win in more economic terms, whether employment or so. But interestingly also, what has been found in science is that if you have a good process, a good procedure, that can to some extent compensate for the sort of negative distributional impacts. So if people feel they are part of a process and really internalize a decision, own it, they are more likely to accept sacrifices or change. Of course, as you kind of implied in your question there, the challenge is time. And do we have time for these procedures that are so important in terms of how we plan the process, ensure it's locally grounded, invites multiple stakeholders, or do we need to see change more quickly, given the short time to 2030, and then given the tipping points that we heard about in the morning? And I think that's the real dilemma here. And again, what we seem to see is that humans are pretty good at adapting quickly when change is immediate, like with the pandemic. Most societies still accepted the restrictions. And also if change is kind of slow enough, gradual enough, maybe we also don't really perceive it as change imposed on us. It becomes naturalized. So I think this kind of time window, which we are now dealing with, where, you know, it's like maybe 6 months up to 5 years, that's the tricky one, and where you easily get groups and communities into these kind of bargaining positions. It's perceived more as a maybe negotiation than this jointly owned process. So I'll finish off by saying also that you know, the theme of this conversation is working together, which I think is, of course, incredibly important, and I think we are trying that in many ways, also from science. But I think we also need to be realistic and realize that we see goal conflicts, and we see conflicts between interests. So I think rather recognize that, be explicit, and develop and use good conflict resolution processes rather than sort of, pretend it's all synergies and all good. So I think quite an honest conversation with the public is important at this point.
Thank you, and I think it's really, really good that you sort of name the time frame. It's not a short-term change like the start of the pandemic. It's also not a slow, gentle cultural sea change. It's the mid-term that's difficult, and we're in a decade of multiple overlapping crises, or that already cause a lot of negotiation and interest conflicts. So I wanted to ask you, Mr. Kärkkäinen, from the perspective of governmental practices and public finance, how do you see that this sort of a planned transformation in troubled times? What are the tools for supporting that in the middle of all of the other pressures that are placed on public finance at this time?
I think the main point is that the transition is planned, because we know the urgency of the decision making, but the urgency can also lead to unoptimal policies, and that we have seen in the few crises that we have had. So we should avoid making large decisions while in a crisis if possible, because that can lead to unoptimal and blunt tools. We have seen this both in the pandemic and the energy crisis, where we have had to build new social security and taxation measures in a matter of weeks and not months or years that we would like to have. And when you have just weeks to build a new policy, you're bound to lead to blunt tools and unoptimal tools from the perspective of public finance, but also from the perspective of households as well. And one thing that I have been wondering about, looking at the energy crisis and how different governments have reacted to kind of surging electricity prices, is how hard is it to compensate fully to households and also have the change that we need? Because from the economic point of view and the ecological point of view, we should just say electricity prices are surging, you should cut down consumption. But from the fairness point of view or the political point of view, that's not an option. But if we compensate it fully to all households, then we won't get the change that we need. And that's something that I think we're going to have to balance, is how much we can compensate from the household point of view, from the political point of view, but also how our public finances can achieve kind of the sustainability that we can afford to have these kind of compensation measures to households that are in dire need. So one thing that I kind of find is the main thing is we should now know what the next crisis is, so we can have measures that will fit to that. And of course we don't know what the next crisis is unless we know the root measures and the root causes, but we should kind of think of what kind of policies at the national level, at the municipality level, at the EU level, we should be now thinking about and building about, that we will be better equipped when the next crisis hits us.
So this is, I guess, we've also mentioned the word resilience here earlier, that we will not know what the next crisis is, but the system should somehow be equipped to deal with any possible kind of a crisis that is going to come next. Did anyone else in the panel have anything to add to these points about negotiating sort of the political processes and needs and the ecological points of view, or shall we move on to the global economy? Because then my next question is to Professor Linnanen, because all of these issues are related to the structures of the global economic system. How is the economy equipped to deal with the systemic transformation?
Well, not so well. I think what has happened is that our economic system, in a way, it's been locked into growth dependence. I'm not taking stance whether growth is bad or good, but we have such structures which have locked our system that we have to grow. And in a way, taking this managerial perspective, it's this kind of phrase, you manage what you measure, and if we measure GDP, and that has happened since the Second World War, the great acceleration of everything, acceleration of production, acceleration of consumption, information flows, material flows, monetary flows. So we got it because we measured amount of transactions, which is GDP. And it's exponential growth after growth, so we have had exponential curves also on the impact side. And somehow we've created this kind of machine, which it's a bit difficult to stop. But okay, then if we take a honest look of those elephants in the economic system, I don't know whether these are root causes, but I give you 3, and they are negotiable. I'm not quite sure about them, but that's what current science is indicating. So the first one is overconsumption. And we have to realize that, ordinary life in Europe is overconsumption. If you look from the ecological footprint point of view. So it's not just the luxury of the elite and all that kind of consumption. It's our ordinary structure is overconsumption. How to deal with that? I have no answer for that, but we have to start addressing it, that consumption is, we are allowed, there is a design principle that we are allowed to consume the amount we earn. And why should it be like that? So if we ask an honest question on that. Then the second clear problem is that the rules of distribution, which also mentioned there in the economic system, they tend to increase inequality in a current way. So it appears to be so that provision of capital is, given a higher value than provision of labor, or even more so provision of care, which is not seen in GDP calculations. So, and this is a mechanism which makes rich people richer and poor people poorer. So how to deal with this issue? It's how we distribute the wealth which we already have achieved. We don't have to grow, we have an amount of wealth already. And the third one is transparency, or actually the lack of transparency in the economic system. So we still accept the fact that, if there are large flows of money, we can hide them. We can hide ownership, and this is an accepted practice of today. Of course, we know that money laundering and those kind of issues have been taken, there have been more serious concerns and mechanisms for that, but still, if I would have a large sum of money, I could hide it. And I could use that for purposes which no one can trace back. So why we have designed and still accept such, and when it comes to just transition, this kind of transparency is crucial, and it's also relevant when we talk about money.
So we have these systemic barriers to transformation in the global economic system level. Johanna Kentala-Lehtonen, how does that sound to you, given the current political and economic situation and the pressure to use the tools you have in the Prime Minister's office? Are those real concerns to you, and if so, how can those be overcome in the mid-term time frame? No, sorry, that was an unfair question, but generally, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, firstly, I think these are very interesting to put these root causes in such a list and then think about what they actually mean. And I agree with the first one. That's also what I was kind of trying to put out, that we need the new definition of the good life is that we need to see that we don't need to consume this much, and it's not possible anymore. We're not living in an abundant world where everybody can have everything. But this is, of course, very difficult message politically. But at the same time, I also think that the values have been changing, and that there are a lot of people already thinking that consumption is not the goal of life. And I think this is just such a message that keeps on growing, and I think it will influence. The second one, the rules of distribution, is of course something that we have been battling for hundreds of years. It's a historical problem, and there is no easy solution. In like thinking of political realities, thinking of the situation of today, it's good to understand these root causes. It's good to bring them to light, but at the same time understand that it is difficult to react fast and to get enough political backing for the politicians to be able to make decisions that will change this fast. I would also like to come back to the idea of resilience and building the resilience to the new crisis. I think that what Olle said about the need to know the next crisis, to need to be prepared to plan the transformation is crucial, and is something that we really should be putting resources on. I think that one thing that can be done on the governmental level and is something to think about, for example, when the new government starts next spring, is how to divide the resources inside the ministries, for example, and how to find those places where we really need to put our attention on so that we are resilient when the new crises come and prepare for them.
Now, one of the questions that we also wanted to address in this panel was who should lead the process, which clearly maybe does not will not be one actor. But Miriam Boveda, I wanted to hear your thoughts on this. Who could lead these kinds of change processes so that they are fair and just, and they're perceived as fair and just?
What I think for that we need to come back to the basic principle that we have in cohesion policy, which is the partnership principle. So we have this key feature, and we have had this for decades. Of course, we are operating in the administrative and institutional framework of member states and regions. So we need to see how to best have this principle implemented, and what is the best governance structure possible to make this process most effective. And I was also thinking, what is partnership is not given to all the stakeholders. There is a learning process for being an effective partner. And what we make available in the framework of our funds also is support to stakeholders to also become effective partners, because, as we said before, time is an issue. And you need to learn how to negotiate what is the best for the collective best, no, for the collectivity. So this is why this support in capacity building for stakeholders is important. And of course, they have to do the best possible to make their voice heard, but in a good manner. And we, at the level of the European Commission, we also, of course, implement a partnership principle with continuous dialogue with all stakeholders. And we are having a dialogue on just transition every 6 months. So I want to invite all of you to join presentially or online the next dialogue on just transition that we will have in the framework of the Just Transition platform on the 24th and 26th of October. And there we have the possibility to interact with all the stakeholders who are part of the Just Transition at the EU level. Last time round we had more than 1,000 participants, so this is a key moment where we can have this constructive dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, since we have many scientists in the room, I wanted to ask sort of where do you see, and this is kind of to all of you, but maybe I'll start with you, Dr. Persson. What are your thoughts? Where do you see a possibility for scientists to act in order to get data-based or knowledge-based decision-making into a good start and involved in those processes of dialogue and partnership? What can scientists do, and where should they start?
I think a lot is already being done by committed scientists, engaged scholars, science activists. It's also a term that we hear more and more. If I could wish, I would, wish us as a community, science, to maybe put aside for these next 5 years or so a little bit on the, academic, like the emphasis on publications and sort of meeting those academic criteria and using the tools and skills, resources that we have to really serve the transformation. However, not to the point that, undermining our credibility, of course, as scientists. I think that this is a really important issue to not cross that line. And still stick to, of course, the scientific method and validating that, but still being as applied as possible, I think. And I think there are 3 ways we can, 3 powerful tools. One is to convene dialogues. Sometimes it's more kind of less conflict-inducing to invite to a research workshop than a sort of meeting with policymakers. You can have a logic of joint learning rather than sort of, okay, are we starting to negotiate positions here? I think another way is, of course, to provide evidence, really quantitative evidence, which policy tools might work, what is the cost of inaction, etc. What are the benefits of action? This is really a tried and tested method, and what we find at our institute is that this is the type of information that decision makers really need. For example, we put out some numbers on global methane emission reductions that really helped countries to agree on this global methane pledge a year ago, when otherwise the climate negotiations were quite stuck. The third way is sort of the same point, but really evaluating policy instruments that are in use, and even more that's being done today. I was quite shocked when I learned that carbon pricing mechanisms have not really been so widely evaluated. One recent study did a synthesis, and there were quite few actually evaluations of actually implemented carbon pricing measures, and the finding was that they have not been as effective as perhaps assumed. So I think that's a really sort of hands-on important role for science to contribute to the evaluation and learning at this point in the transformation.
Those are really good 3 points. And Mr. Kärkkäinen, since you are then on the side of of creating policy and wanting to sort of to you're a recipient of the of the science and shaping policy based on data. What do you see? Where do you want to see scientists coming in more strongly?
I hope that we're not the recipients. It's more dialogue, because that's what I think we need more. So active dialogue between policymakers and researchers in order to know what works and what not. But also I think that we need more doing and less talking. Because if we say that we need a completely new economic system in order to face these problems, my worry is that we will be stuck in discussing what kind of system we should have instead of using the policies that we currently have. So for example, if our problem is overconsumption, we have consumption taxation. So we can increase the price of consumption, which will lower the consumption. But if this is something that we would want, we should have political parties that actively say that we will want to increase the price of consumption, and no, we won't compensate it for you. But instead, at least in Finland, we are discussing on how we can compensate the current inflation to different households. And we are going to have our parliamentary elections next April, and I would be surprised if I see some political party suggesting that we should increase the price of consumption. Instead, I can see that we only be discussing on how to compensate current inflation, and that won't help. And if we want to decrease consumption.
And clearly, it's quite likely that we're heading into a long period where it's never going to be the perfect moment to increase taxation to get industries to contribute more. It's going to be a difficult moment. Quickly, we're moving towards the end of this panel, but Professor Linnanen, do you have any comments on this?
Yes, I would like to take strategy perspective. Actually, what those strategies or house strategies basically answering question from point A to reach point B. So question how. So those three ways of acting are in a way symbiotic strategies. So you work together, science works together with policymakers in a symbiotic way, trying to influence the decision making. And this is clearly the dominant talk also here in this panel. But as we know that this is a large system level transformation, typically you cannot transform a system by incremental measures. You need, more powerful actions to make this kind of large-scale transformation to happen. Typically, there is little evidence that any this kind of large societal change starts from those in power. It's quite natural. So it inclines that the strategies are more radical, what we need in order to achieve this transformation. And I think it was also mentioned that scientists as activists are growing, and there is a clear explanation for that. It's a seek for more radical solutions and ways of acting. And we are seeing it also with youth movements, and if I take the most, so in a way, criticism of present system, seeking for alternatives, and even taking one step further, again, using these strategy lenses, I would say that even civil disobedience, we will see it more. It's clear, as long as the system is trying to work in a symbiotic and incremental way, we are not going to solve this, so we are going to see more, critical voices and more critical action during this critical decade.
And now, and thank you, and that was this was a thought that I didn't want to leave hanging without being voiced here, that the question of incremental measures versus more radical challenges to the status quo, it is naturally a big open question here. And then I will end with your thoughts on on concrete points of action, what kinds of collaborative actions between different, it can be science policy, it can be science activist, it can be anything you think of, but what kinds of collaborative actions you would like to see happening in these next, say, 3 to 5 years? And maybe now we can just run through the panel. We'll start with you, Ms. Kertala-Lehtonen, and then move on from there.
Yeah, I think a lot of this has already brought up in this panel. So more dialogue, and especially what came from Ms. Boveda was that we need to take all the different actors to the discussion, especially the youth.
Yeah, and please, and just a quick note, let's keep, this was perfect length, let's keep these short so that everyone can get their coffee.
It's a hard question, but I pick up on what you said. We need to do more doing, less talking. So I really, very practical way, more secondments of scientists to ministries or municipalities to actually be in the room, in the discussion, because we don't really have time to wait.
I would suggest having, after the next parliamentary elections, having a large discussion between the parliament and research, and setting the goal at the parliamentary level, because our governmental term is 4 years and that's a short time. So we need a kind of parliamentary set goal, and research need to help in setting that.
I think scientists have been alerting us for 50 years. This was recently the anniversary of the article published in the Nature on climate change. So I think we need to speak to people's brain, but also to people's heart. And I was attending an exhibition on the emergency of climate change, an art exhibition. So maybe it's a way of transforming the society through different fora and enlarging the circles. So I think we need to enlarge the circles to speak to people's heart and brain.
Yes, it's about acting and doing. We should start creating alternative ways of organizing today, not thinking what's going to be in future. We have to do it today. In a way, we might call it heterotopia, which is not somewhere distant future what we hope for, but we just start doing something which illustrates good life for all within planetary boundaries.
Thank you. Now I want to warmly thank all the panelists for your contributions. And clearly these are complex and critical questions, and we all know that the current political and economic landscape is not the easiest, but it also might present us with opportunities, as was said in the beginning. People do react when there is a crisis. And that means that some kind of a transformation is also not only possible, but also inevitable. We'll continue with these discussions during the next 2 days. Now it's time for a coffee break. And that's until 11 our time. So all of you are participating here in Paasitorni, please grab a cup of coffee or tea, have a nice chat. And after the coffee break, we'll continue with the parallel sessions. 3 interesting discussions taking place simultaneously. So at 11, please find the parallel session that you have registered for when you register for the event. And then for the audience online, we'll also have a break right now. You'll have time for a cup of coffee. The live stream will continue at 11 Finnish time, so in half an hour. And that the live stream will continue with one of the sessions. That's the sustainability of the use of natural resources, role of biodiversity offsetting. That's the parallel session that all of you online will be joining. Thank you so much. Have a great coffee break. And thank you again, panelists.